The air in the bridal suite smelled of expensive orchids and cheap malice. I stood in front of the vanity mirror, the heavy ivory silk of my wedding dress draping around me like a shroud. Outside those double mahogany doors, 400 of New York's elite were sipping vintage champagne, courtesy of my fiancé's family. But inside this room the temperature had dropped to freezing. Rebecca didn't knock when she entered. She never did. She marched in, her 5-inch stiletto heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown. Behind her came her 2 biological children, Ethan and Chloe. They looked like cheap hired muscle poured into high-end tailored suits. With a sickening slap, Rebecca threw a thick manila folder onto the white lace-covered table. "Sign it, Caroline," she said. Her voice had the dry, scraping texture of sandpaper on pine. "Sign it now, or this fairy tale wedding of yours turns into a public execution before the first toast is poured." I didn't turn around immediately. I looked at her reflection in the glass. At 52, Rebecca had the kind of face that expensive plastic surgery couldn't fully soften. The tight, desperate lines of a woman who spent her entire life calculating the net worth of everyone in the room. "A quitclaim deed," I murmured, my voice deadly calm. I caught the gleam of the notary stamp peeking out from the folder. "For the Oakridge house. The $500,000 asset you built with money that should have belonged to this family," Ethan sneered, stepping forward. He adjusted his cuff links, his eyes burning with the raw, unchecked avarice of a lifelong parasite. "You played your little games, Caroline. But the ride is over. They thought they had me pinned. They thought the threat of a public scandal, of the fabricated financial fraud documents they had spent weeks assembling to ruin my architectural firm, would make me buckle. They thought I would bleed out my hard work just to save face in front of my new aristocratic in-laws. But as I finally turned to face them, my gaze drifted past Rebecca's shoulder. Standing in the shadows near the back exit of the suite was a tall man in a bespoke charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Vance, the senior partner of Vance and Associates. He didn't say a word. He just gave me a microscopic nod, his lips twitching into the faintest, coldest smile. The trap was set. But to understand why I was about to walk into it willingly, you have to understand how I got to this room. You have to understand the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the people standing in front of me. People lose themselves in fictional revenge stories all the time. They listen to tales of grand, cinematic justice and think that's how the world works. But real life isn't a movie. In the real world, justice isn't delivered with a fist or a dramatic speech. It's delivered with a fountain pen, a hidden clause, and the cold, unyielding machinery of the law. If you want to see how a real calculated retaliation unfolds against the people who try to destroy you, take a second to subscribe to this channel and like this story. Because what I did to these greedy heirs wasn't just a comeback. It was a legal execution. My mother died when I was 12. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It took her in less than 6 months, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a house and a husband who didn't know how to breathe without her. My father, Nathan, was a weak man. Some men are forged in fires. My father simply melted. He couldn't handle the silence of a grieving teenage daughter, nor could he handle the sudden weight of the mortgage. Enter Rebecca. She met him at a grief support group she had no business attending. She was a professional predator disguised as a grieving widow. Within 6 months of my mother's passing, she had moved into our house. Within a year, my mother's sewing room was cleared out, her porcelain dishes replaced, and I was treated like an unwanted ghost in the home my mother had decorated. Nathan looked away. That was his greatest sin. He didn't abuse me himself. He just permitted my erasure. When Rebecca served Ethan and Chloe the prime cuts of meat at dinner and left me the scraps, Nathan stared at his plate. When Chloe wore my mother's vintage gold locket and lied, claiming I gave it to her, Nathan told me to stop causing drama. The climax of their cruelty came the morning after my 18th birthday. I woke up to find my clothes packed into 2 battered canvas duffel bags sitting on the porch. Rebecca stood at the door, flanked by her children. Nathan was nowhere to be seen. She had sent him on an errand across town. "You're an adult now, Caroline," Rebecca had said, her face completely devoid of human warmth. "And frankly, your attitude is a toxin in this household. I've talked to your father. We're moving in a different direction with our family assets. You need to find your own way." When Nathan returned, he didn't call me. He didn't look for me. He sent a single text message. Asterisk, I'm sorry, sweetie. It's for the best. Be independent. Asterisk, he attached a digital transfer of $50. $50 for 18 years of daughterhood. I spent the next 7 years living in places that smelled of damp carpet in desperation. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. I poured scalding diner coffee at 4 a.m., spent my afternoons sitting through grueling architecture lectures at the State College, and pulled 8-hour night shifts loading crates at a logistics warehouse. My hands were permanently raw, split from the cold and stained with blueprint toner. There were nights when dinner was a single sleeve of saltine crackers dipped in tap water. But I had one thing Rebecca couldn't touch. Before my maternal grandfather passed away, he did something incredibly smart. He bypassed my weak-willed father entirely and left a 2-acre plot of land in Oakridge directly to me. It was an ironclad, independent deed. Rebecca had tried to contest it when I turned 18, but the land back then was nothing but a rocky, overgrown hill outside the city limits. Her lawyer told her it wasn't worth the billable hours to fight for it, so she forgot about it. I didn't. That land became my obsession. For 7 years, every penny I didn't spend on rent or tuition went into that soil. I didn't just hire contractors. I acted as my own project manager. I cleared the brush myself. I drew the blueprints myself. I knew the exact market price of poured concrete, the cost of timber, and the strict municipal codes for foundation depths. By the winter of 2025, it was finished. A sleek, minimalist masterpiece of glass and reinforced concrete, nestled perfectly into the hillside. It was worth $500,000 on paper, but to me it was my sanity. It was the proof that Rebecca hadn't broken me. Then came 2026. The city council dropped a bombshell. A massive tech conglomerate was building a multi-billion-dollar campus just 3 miles from my property. The entire Oakridge district was rezoned overnight for high-density, luxury residential estates. My quiet 2-acre plot didn't just appreciate in value. Its worth exploded. Developers were suddenly knocking on my door, offering obscene amounts of money just for the dirt my house stood on. And that was when the sharks smelled the blood in the water. The family that had completely forgotten my phone number for nearly a decade suddenly started showing up at my office. They sent flowers. They sent tearful emails from Nathan about family unity. But I knew exactly what they wanted. Rebecca's own finances were crumbling under the weight of Ethan's failed day trading habits and Chloe's exorbitant lifestyle. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted my asset. I ignored every single one of their calls. I blocked their numbers. I built my life, fell in love with a man who saw me for who I truly was, and planned a beautiful wedding. Which brings us back to this very room. To the manila folder on the lace tablecloth. To the absolute certainty in Rebecca's eyes that she was about to rob me of my life's work. "We know the land value, Caroline," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction as she leaned against the vanity. "We know what that property is worth now. You think you're going to marry into the prestigious Sterling family and leave us with nothing? Father is sick and he needs the money from that house. If you don't sign this quitclaim deed over to Ethan today, right now, we walk out into that ballroom and show your new father-in-law the bank statements proving you embezzled funds from your own firm to build it." The documents were forged, of course. Crude, but damaging enough to cause a massive legal scandal that would delay my wedding and ruin my firm's reputation before I could prove my innocence in court. They knew a high-society family like the Sterlings wouldn't tolerate that kind of press. They thought they had wrapped a noose around my neck. I looked at the pen resting beside the document. A heavy black Montblanc. "You really want this house, Rebecca?" I asked softly, keeping my back turned to them for just one more second so they couldn't see the dangerous, icy spark igniting in my eyes. "It's ours by right, you ungrateful little bitch," Rebecca hissed. "Sign the paper." Picked up the pen. My hand shook slightly, a perfect theatrical display of a woman utterly defeated. I let out a long, trembling breath, allowing them to savor the absolute peak of their arrogant, short-sighted triumph. They wanted my house. They wanted my blood. And as I lowered the nib of the pen to the signature line, I prepared to give them exactly what they asked for. The ink in my Montblanc pen felt heavy like liquid lead. Before I pressed the gold nib to that crisp white paper, my mind drifted back to how this trap was manufactured. It didn't start today. It started 6 months ago, in the sterile fluorescent-lit hallways of Columbia University Medical Center. My father, Nathan, had been diagnosed with stage 4 small cell lung cancer. For a normal family, a terminal diagnosis is a time for grief, for whispered confessions, for holding on to whatever time is left. But to Rebecca, Ethan, and Chloe, my father's failing lungs weren't a tragedy. They were a liquidation schedule. Nathan's mind disintegrated quickly under the dual assault of the tumors and the heavy doses of oxycodone. He became paranoid, terrified of dying broke, terrified of being left alone. Rebecca saw her opening and took it with surgical precision. She systematically cut off his phone lines, intercepted his mail, and fed his drug-addled brain a steady diet of venomous lies. "Look at Caroline," she would whisper into his ear while changing his oxygen tanks. She's a partner at her own architectural firm now. She's marrying into the sterling fortune. She doesn't care about your medical bills. She's keeping that $500,000 Oakridge house all to herself while you rot. Weak men don't look for the truth. They look for a scapegoat. My father believed her. Within 3 weeks he signed over a comprehensive, durable power of attorney to Rebecca, giving her total executive control over his legal and financial existence. That was their first mistake. And it was exactly what I had been waiting for. But Ethan couldn't just wait for the cancer to finish the job. He was drowning in nearly $200,000 of bad margin calls from day trading tech stocks on leverage. He needed cash, and he needed it before the brokerage firm liquidated his remaining assets. He hired a disgraced, struck-off forensic accountant, a man who used to handle cooked books for construction syndicates in Queens, to target my business, Caroline Design and Partners LLC. They dug through the public records of my signature project, the Riverside Commercial Pavilion. They manufactured a paper trail, doctored invoices, fabricated ledger sheets, and look-alike bank routing numbers, designed to make it look like I had commingled family funds from an old, defunct corporate account my father owned to inflate my business equity. In the American legal system, an allegation of corporate embezzlement doesn't just damage your reputation. It acts as a financial stroke. It triggers immediate internal audits, freezes your corporate lines of credit, and alerts the state licensing board. Ethan knew the anatomy of a scandal. He knew that my fiancé's family, the Sterlings, made their money in old-line New York banking. To the Sterlings, a scandal involving financial fraud is worse than a murder charge. It's bad for the stock price. It's bad for the board of trustees. Ethan had brought those forged documents into my office 2 weeks before the wedding, tossing them onto my desk with a sickening, confident grin. "You have until the wedding day to transfer the Oakridge property to my name," he had told me, his breath smelling of stale coffee and unearned arrogance. If you don't, these files go straight to the district attorney and the Sterling family's chief legal officer. Here is where the story gets dark. Here is where the moral ground beneath us shifts, and I have to ask you a question. I knew about the forged documents. My grandfather's longtime private investigator had flagged Ethan's meetings with that crooked accountant a month prior. I had the legal resources to file for a preemptive court injunction. I could have gone to a judge, exposed Rebecca's manipulation of my sick father, revoked her power of attorney, and placed Nathan under a neutral, court-appointed medical guardianship. I could have saved my father from his final months of psychological abuse. But if I did that, Rebecca would have pulled back into the weeds. She would have hired a better lawyer, cleaned up her tracks, and waited for another day to strike. So I chose to do nothing. I chose to let my father continue believing I was a monster. I let him stay under her control because I needed Rebecca to possess that total unmitigated power of attorney. I needed her to believe she had the absolute legal right to act on his behalf. Was it cruel to leave my dying father in the hands of those parasites just to ensure my own legal leverage? Was it a cold, calculated betrayal of a man who was already slipping away? I want you to think about that. Would you have protected a father who abandoned you to the wolves when you were 18? Or would you have used his weakness to utterly destroy the people who ruined your life? Let me know what you think, because when I made that choice, my conscience didn't skip a single beat. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Vance had called me into his office on Wall Street. The room smelled of old leather and expensive floor wax. He unlocked a heavy, fireproof floor safe and pulled out a faded manila folder tied with a black ribbon. It was marked the Oakridge Trust Addendum, My maternal grandfather wasn't just a landowner. He had spent 40 years as a senior partner in a white-shoe corporate litigation firm. He understood the genetic structure of human greed. He knew my father was a spineless creature who would eventually marry a predator. "Your grandfather was an artist of the law, Caroline," Mr. Vance had said, his voice as dry as autumn leaves as he slid the document across the desk. "He didn't just leave you the land. He built a fortress around it. It's an irrevocable trust structure with an embedded poison pill clause." Vance explained the mechanism to me. It was breathtakingly brutal. The trust provided a steady, quiet annuity of $200,000 a year to my father and his heirs, funded by my grandfather's old blue-chip stock portfolio. However, the addendum stated that if any beneficiary or their legal representative used coercion, duress, or illegal leverage to force the transfer of the Oakridge property away from me, two things would happen automatically. First, their rights to the multi-million-dollar trust annuity would be permanently, instantly terminated. Second, they would be legally liable to refund the trust 3 times the fair market value of the contested asset. And because Rebecca held my father's durable power of attorney, any action she took to extort me would legally bind her, my father, and her children to that clause. I looked up from the desk in the bridal suite, staring directly into Rebecca's hard, predatory eyes. The Montblanc pen was still poised above the paper. "Before I sign this," I said, my voice trembling with a vulnerability I didn't feel, "I need you to state clearly on the record that this is what you want. That you are taking this house to settle what you believe is a family debt." "Sign the damn paper, Caroline," Rebecca snapped, her fingers clutching her designer handbag so hard her knuckles turned white. "We're done talking." I lowered the pen. I signed my name. The trap was sprung. Ethan snatched the document before the ink could even dry. The sharp sound of paper tearing away from the leather folio echoed in the quiet room. He looked down at my signature written in the precise, elegant cursive my mother had taught me. A smug, ugly smile broke across his face, stretching his thin lips over teeth stained from tobacco. "Smart girl," he whispered, sliding the quitclaim deed into his breast pocket like a trophy. "See? That was not so hard, was it?" Rebecca did not smile. Her eyes remained fixed on me, cold and calculating, searching my face for any sign of a hidden camera or a recording device. She was too seasoned a player to celebrate early. She stepped closer, the rustle of her expensive emerald taffeta gown sounding like a snake sliding through dry grass. The scent of her heavy Chanel perfume fought with the delicate fragrance of the white roses decorating the suite. "Don't look at us like that, Caroline," she said, her voice dropping into a deceptive, motherly purr. "We are just taking what is fair. You are marrying into millions. You do not need a $500,000 piece of dirt in Oakridge. This ensures your brother can finally start his real estate firm. It is called family utility." The heavy oak door connecting the bridal suite to the private restroom clicked open. I did not turn around, but I saw him in the mirror. My father. Nathan looked like a ghost stuffed into a rented tuxedo. The stage 4 cancer had chewed through his flesh over the last 6 months, leaving his skin a sallow, jaundiced yellow that looked horrific against the stark white of his dress shirt. His collar was loose around a neck that had shrunk by 2 inches. He leaned heavily on a silver-tipped cane, his breath rattling in his chest like loose gravel in a tin can. The smell of rubbing alcohol and stale sweat trailed behind him. "It is for the best, Caroline," he wheezed, refusing to meet my eyes in the glass. He stared at the carpet instead. "You always were too stubborn for your own good. Your grandfather spoiled you. He made you think you were better than the rest of us." The psychological sting of his words did not penetrate my skin. The girl who would have cried over that betrayal died 10 years ago on a rainy morning when those 2 canvas duffel bags were dumped on a cold porch. But looking at him now, a profound sense of disgust washed over me. He was not just weak. He was a willing accomplice to his own daughter's robbery. "Did you know about the forged embezzlement documents, Dad?" I asked, my voice entirely flat, devoid of any theatrical anger. "Did you know Ethan hired a criminal accountant to ruin my firm?" Nathan flinched. He cleared his throat, a wet, hacking sound that ended in a gasp for air. "It did not have to come to that. If you had just answered my calls, if you had just shared the wealth, we would not be here. You forced our hand." That was his grand rationalization. In his mind, my success was a crime against their mediocrity. He needed to believe I was the selfish one so he could sleep at night while his wife stripped his only biological child of her inheritance. Ethan chuckled a wet, grating noise as he stepped over to the vanity table. He picked up a sleek, black digital tablet that had been resting face down beside my makeup lights. Your dad did not have anything to do with the heavy lifting, Caroline. That was all me. And just in case you think about calling your new husband's family lawyers the second you walk out of this room, let me show you our insurance policy. He tapped the screen. A digital audio waveform appeared, glowing a toxic blue in the dimming afternoon light. He hit play. The voice that came out of the speakers was unmistakably mine. The tone, the cadence, the slight rasp I get when I am tired, it was perfect. But the words were pure poison. Eleanor Sterling is a senile old blue blood gatekeeper. My digital clone sneered from the tablet. I do not give a damn about her family's heritage. Once the marriage license is filed, I am restructuring their foundation accounts and moving the capital into my own shell companies. The old hag will not even realize she has been cleaned out until it is too late. Ethan paused the audio, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. A sophisticated artificial intelligence voice model, Caroline, compiled from over 50 hours of your recorded Zoom consultations and public design presentations. It took my guy in Queens 3 weeks to program the inflection. If I press send right now, this file goes directly to Eleanor Sterling's personal phone and every member of the St. Regis ballroom media list. Let us see how fast the Sterling family security details drag you out of your own reception. This was extortion in its purest, most textbook form under New York Penal Law Section 155.05. By presenting a forged document, threatening financial ruin, and utilizing a deceptive audio file to compel the transfer of a real estate asset, they were not just playing dirty. They were committing a Class C felony. But here is the absolute coldest part of my design. The moment where I ask you to look into your own soul. I had a digital recorder active in my bridal bouquet since the moment they walked into this room. I had every single word of this conversation captured in crystal clear, uncompressed audio. I had Ethan admitting to the forgery. I had Rebecca demanding the property. And most importantly, I had my father, Nathan, validating the extortion. Under New York law, a durable power of attorney means that the principal, my father, is fully liable for the actions his agent takes within the scope of that power. By standing here and participating in this shakedown, Nathan was not just a sick old man being manipulated. He was legally a co-conspirator to grand larceny. When the federal and state indictments came down, his medical condition would not save him from spending his final months in a federal medical detention center. Let me ask you directly. If a parent willfully participates in an ambush designed to destroy your life's work on your wedding day, do they still deserve the protection of your mercy? Or do you let the legal machinery crush them along with the rest of the parasites? I did not hesitate. I looked at my father's hollow cheeks and felt absolutely nothing but the icy satisfaction of a chess player moving her final piece into checkmate. I turned back to the vanity mirror, calmly pinning the lace veil into my dark hair with steady hands. If you really want this house, Ethan, we do not hide here. In the shadows, I said. The ballroom downstairs is completely packed. Let us execute this transfer deed right now on the main stage entirely in front of the public crowd and cameras. Rebecca's eyes narrowed into two dangerous slits. For 3 seconds the room was so quiet you could hear the faint rhythmic hum of the hotel's central air conditioning. She was calculating. I could practically see the gears turning behind her heavily dynamic, Botoxed forehead. Ethan broke the silence with a sharp, bark-like laugh. You want to sign it on the main stage? In front of the Sterlings? What's the play here, Caroline? You trying to look like a martyr? I'm trying to survive, I said, letting my voice drop to a ragged whisper. I looked down at my hands, squeezing the stems of my white orchid bouquet so hard the bruised petals exuded a sweet, sickly syrup. If I sign this in a dark room under the threat of a deepfake audio file, I will look like a coward to myself. But if we go down there, if I present this as a grand, final gift to my ailing father before I join my husband's family, the Sterlings will see it as an act of profound filial piety. They value tradition. They value sacrifice. You get the property and I keep my dignity. Nobody asks questions. The scandal is avoided. Rebecca exchanged a quick, loaded look with Ethan. I knew exactly what they were thinking. In New York real estate litigation, a transfer executed in private under documented threats is an open and shut case of civil duress. But a transfer executed in a ballroom filled with 400 wealthy witnesses, where the grantor appears to be smiling and speaking willingly on a microphone, that is an absolute bulletproof defense against any future attempt to rescind the deed. They thought I was handing them a gilded surrender to protect my social standing. Fine, Rebecca said, her lips curling into an icy victorious sneer. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small rectangular block of black wood and steel, a mobile notary public stamp. She had brought her own corrupt legal clerk, a man named Miller who sat in the lobby downstairs, ready to authorize the paperwork on a moment's notice. We do it your way. But remember, one wrong word on that microphone, Caroline, and Ethan presses the upload button. No wrong words, I murmured. As we left the bridal suite, the heavy mahogany doors opened into a different world. The grand corridor of the St. Regis was lined with gold leaf mirrors and massive crystal sconces that cast a blinding cinematic glare over us. I walked in the lead, the long train of my ivory silk gown sweeping the plush crimson carpet with a soft shushing sound. Behind me walked the triad of my tormentors, Rebecca holding herself like a conquering queen, Ethan with the folder tucked securely under his arm, and my father Nathan, his cane clicking unevenly against the floorboards like a ticking clock. We reached the double doors of the grand ballroom. The bass from the jazz orchestra inside vibrated through the heavy wood, a deep rhythmic thudding that matched the steady pulse of adrenaline in my veins. The white-gloved attendants pulled the doors open, and a wall of sound and light hit us. 400 people in formal black tie attire turned their heads. Flashbulbs from the society photographers exploded in brilliant white bursts. The room smelled of roasting prime rib, expensive French champagne, and the suffocating sweetness of thousands of imported gardenias. At the main table near the stage sat Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch of my fiancé's family. She sat rigid, her silver hair styled into a flawless helmet, her multi-million-dollar pearl choker catching the light. Beside her was Julian, my fiancé. When he saw me, his face softened into a warm, genuine smile. He had no idea what was happening. He thought this was just the beginning of our beautiful, untainted life together. And here is where I must ask you to pause and look at the chessboard I had constructed. To make this trap work, I had to deceive Julian too. I had to let the man I loved sit in that room, believing everything was perfect, while I used his family's pristine reputation as the ultimate anvil to crush my stepmother. It was a calculated risk. A small dark stain on the white fabric of our wedding day. Tell me, would you have kept your fiancé in the dark to protect the integrity of the trap, or would you have risked the entire operation by confessing the truth to him beforehand? I didn't give myself time to feel guilty. I stepped onto the raised mahogany stage, waving off the master of ceremonies as I took the wireless microphone from his hand. The orchestra tapered off into silence, the final notes of the saxophone fading into the high vaulted ceilings. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Sterling family, and dear friends, I said, my voice echoing flawlessly through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. I looked out at the crowd, letting a soft, trembling smile touch my lips. Before Julian and I exchange our vows, there is a matter of deep personal importance that I must address. As many of you know, my father, Nathan, is facing a very difficult medical battle. A murmur of polite sympathy ripples through the ballroom. I saw Eleanor Sterling nod approvingly. My family has always believed in quiet sacrifice, I continued, turning my body slightly so the main livestream camera, the one broadcasting our wedding to our satellite offices in London and Tokyo, had a crystal-clear, high-definition angle of my face. Today, to ensure my father's peace of mind, and to honor the legacy of the home I built with my own hands in Oakridge, I am making a formal public presentation to my family. I signaled toward the side of the stage. Rebecca, Ethan, and their crooked notary clerk, Miller, stepped up into the bright, blinding glare of the spotlights. Rebecca's face was a masterpiece of manufactured emotion. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a single theatrical tear to roll down her cheek as she reached out to touch my arm. "Thank you, Caroline," Rebecca whispered into the second microphone, her voice carrying beautifully to every corner of the room. "Your father is so deeply grateful for your compliance." Ethan stepped forward, laying the quitclaim deed flat onto the gold-trimmed signing podium in the center of the stage. He uncapped the heavy black Montblanc pen and pressed it into my hand. His fingers were warm, greasy, and trembling with the sheer, intoxicating rush of unearned wealth. "Sign it, sister," he whispered under his breath, his back blocking the view of the crowd but fully visible to the high-angle security camera I had personally repositioned the night before. "Sign it and let's end this farce." I looked down at the document. Quitclaim deed, State of New York. Grantor: Caroline Vance Design Partners LLC. Grantee: Ethan Miller Corporation. The legal description of the property was precise, the exact coordinates of the $500,000 architectural masterpiece I had bled for. I lowered the pen. My hand shook noticeably. The crowd watched in rapt, silent fascination, believing they were witnessing a beautiful, heartbreaking act of family generosity. I pressed the gold nib to the paper. The blue-black ink flowed smoothly across the line, sealing my signature. Miller immediately stepped up, pressing his heavy steel notary seal onto the paper with a loud metallic clack that echoed like a gunshot through the microphone. Ethan grabbed the finalized document, his face lit with a manic, untouchable arrogance. He had done it. He had cajoled, extorted, and cheated his way into a fortune right in front of New York's highest society. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a silent, mocking victory. But as I stepped back from the podium, I didn't look defeated. I looked at the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom, because I knew that the clock had just struck 5. And exactly at 5 o'clock, the legal machinery of my grandfather's ghost was scheduled to arrive. The applause swelled through the St. Regis ballroom like a sudden downpour on a tin roof. 400 pairs of wealthy manicured hands clapped in polite, synchronized rhythm. To them, it was a beautiful vignette of upper-class generosity, a successful daughter taking care of her terminally ill father. Julian smiled from the front table, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and slight bewilderment. He didn't know the underbelly of my life. He didn't know the grime I had crawled through. Ethan stepped away from the podium, his hand pressed over his breast pocket, as if he could feel the heat of the $500,000 asset through his tailored wool jacket. He gave a sharp, imperceptible nod to the crooked notary Miller, who was already packing his heavy steel stamp back into a black leather briefcase. Rebecca leaned toward me, her emerald-draped shoulder brushing against the delicate silk of my wedding veil. The scent of her expensive Chanel perfume felt thick, suffocating. "You played your part well, Caroline," she whispered, her voice a low, venomous hiss underneath the roar of the crowd. Her smile remained fixed for the cameras, a horrifying mask of maternal affection. "You saved your little business. Now go marry your rich boy and stay out of our way. If you ever try to contest this deed, remember, Ethan still has that audio file on his hard drive. One click, and your new life turns to ash." I didn't blink. I didn't pull away. The faux vulnerability that had softened my features for the past hour vanished, replaced by the cold, structural rigidity of a reinforced concrete foundation. The tremor in my hand stopped instantly. I reached out and grabbed the wireless Shure microphone from the podium before the master of ceremonies could retrieve it. A sharp, high-pitched prickle of audio feedback pierced the room, cutting through the applause like a razor blade. The clapping stopped. The room fell into a sudden heavy silence. 400 people sat frozen, champagne flutes halfway to their lips. "Thank you, everyone," I said, my voice carrying with absolute, crystalline clarity through the state-of-the-art house audio system. I turned my head slightly, looking directly into the lens of the primary livestream camera at the back of the hall. The little green tally light was glowing, indicating a live broadcast feed to our international offices and social platforms. Before my family leaves the stage, I want to make sure the public record is completely, unassailably clear. Rebecca's smile froze. The skin around her jaw tightened until the tendons in her neck stood out like wires. She made a subtle movement to step back toward the stairs, but I shifted my position, blocking her path with the heavy train of my dress. "Rebecca," I spoke into the mic, my tone as objective and detached as a federal prosecutor reading a deposition. "Just so there is no ambiguity for the courts or for the hundreds of witnesses in this room, you are accepting this quitclaim deed on behalf of your son, Ethan, under the full authority of the durable power of attorney granted to you by my father, Nathan. Correct?" Ethan took a step forward, his face flushed with a sudden dark surge of blood. He reached out, his hand grasping for the microphone in my grip. "Caroline, that's enough. Step down. The ceremony is over." I pulled the microphone back, my eyes locking onto his with a ferocity that made him hesitate. "I am asking a simple legal question, Ethan. Did you, your mother, and your legal representative demand the immediate transfer of my personal property today, under the explicit condition that my father's medical peace of mind and my company's financial survival depended on my signature?" The silence in the ballroom was total now. You could hear the faint erratic click of my father's silver-tipped cane as he shifted his weight on the hardwood stage. He looked terrified. For the first time, he was realizing that he wasn't backstage in a dark room anymore. He was standing under 50,000 watts of public scrutiny. Rebecca, ever the gambler, tried to salvage the narrative. She stepped up to the second microphone, her voice trembling with a well-rehearsed, shaking pathos. "Caroline, sweetie, we only wanted what was best for your father's estate. It was a mutual family decision. You agreed to this." "I agreed under duress," I said. The word hit the room like a lead weight. Duress. Every corporate lawyer and investment banker in that audience knew exactly what that word meant. It was the legal solvent that dissolved contracts. Ethan sneered, losing his temper, his voice amplified by the stage monitors as he barked back. "It doesn't matter what you call it now. The paperwork is signed. It's witnessed. It's notarized by a licensed officer of the state of New York. You handed it over willingly in front of 400 people. You have nothing, Caroline. You're holding a dead hand. Here is where the architecture of my plan demands a hard, ethical question. To bait them onto this stage, I had turned my own wedding, the sacred celebration of my union with Julian, into a legal sting operation. I had allowed my father-in-law's prestigious guests to be used as unwitting background extras in a high-stakes corporate ambush. I knew it would leave a bitter taste in Julian's mouth. I knew his mother would look at me with a new degree of fear and suspicion. Let me ask you. When you are fighting predators who use deepfake audio and fabricated fraud charges to strip you of your life's work, do you have the luxury of keeping your hands clean? Or do you weaponize whatever ground you stand on, even if it means burning a piece of your own wedding day to ensure your survival? Tell me what you think, because as I looked out at the stunned faces of the high society crowd, I felt no regret. I felt only the cold, hard thrill of the trap snapping shut. "You're right about one thing, Ethan," I said, letting a slow, razor-thin smile spread across my face. I looked past his shoulder toward the grand double doors at the back of the room. "The paperwork is finalized. The chain of custody is established. The crime is fully recorded on a single-party consent digital drive hidden right here in my bouquet, and broadcasted live to 3 separate cloud servers." Ethan's hand flew to his pocket, his fingers twitching against the manila folder as a sudden, sickening realization began to dawn on his face. The grand-grandfather clock in the foyer struck exactly 5:02 p.m. And right on time. I whispered into the microphone, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet purr. "The bill has arrived." The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The heavy brass-handled doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They were flung wide by 2 hotel security guards. Through the threshold stepped Mr. Vance. He did not look like a man attending a wedding celebration. He looked like a heart surgeon arriving at a terminal diagnosis. He wore a dark gray charcoal suit that absorbed the bright light of the chandeliers. 2 junior associates followed 3 paces behind him, their faces pale and serious, carrying thick black leather litigation bags that looked heavy enough to hold a man's life. The crowd parted for him without a word. There was an authority in his stride that New York society recognized instantly, the unmistakable presence of a white-shoe senior partner, who billed $1,500 an hour to dismantle fortunes. Vance walked down the center aisle, his eyes fixed entirely on the stage. He did not look at the floral arrangements. He did not look at the ice sculptures. He looked at me, gave a single curt nod, and then turned his gaze onto Rebecca. Ethan stepped toward the edge of the stage, his hand instinctively gripping the front of his jacket where the quitclaim deed was hidden. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly through the microphone. "This is a private family matter. Security, remove these people." The security guards did not move. They stood at the doors, their arms crossed, their expressions completely blank. Mr. Vance reached the base of the stage. He did not climb the stairs. He stood on the floor, looking up at the triad of parasites with a cold professional detachment that was more terrifying than any display of anger. One of his associates immediately stepped to the House AV booth, sliding a secure flash drive into the primary digital rack. The massive 20-foot projection screens behind the jazz orchestra flickered. The digital image of my fiancé and me vanished, replaced by a high-resolution PDF document bearing the official blue ribbon of the New York State Surrogate's Court. The title at the top of the screen read, "The Arthur Vance Estate Irrevocable Trust Agreement, 2018 Restatement with 2024 Addendum. My name is Arthur Vance." His voice boomed through the ballroom, dry, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. He did not need a microphone. His tone possessed the natural resonance of a man who had spent 40 years commanding federal courtrooms. "I am the executor of the estate of late Senior Judge Arthur Vance, Caroline's maternal grandfather. I am here to formally put on the record the immediate legal consequences of the transaction that has just been executed on this stage." Rebecca's face lost its color. She looked at the screen, her eyes darting across the dense, single-spaced legal text. "That old man has been dead for 2 years, she muttered, her voice shaking as she stepped closer to the microphone. "His estate was settled. This has nothing to do with us." "On the contrary, Mrs. Miller," Mr. Vance said, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket. "Your late father-in-law understood the exact nature of the people he left behind. In 2024, 6 months before his passing, he sat in my office on Wall Street and drafted a very specific non-discretionary addendum to his irrevocable family trust, an asset portfolio that currently holds $6 million in blue-chip equities." A collective gasp rippled through the 400 guests. $6 million. Ethan's mouth opened slightly, his eyes widening with a sudden sickening mixture of greed and terror. He looked at the screen, trying to read the legal terminology, his chest heaving under his tuxedo shirt. "Under Article 9, Section 4 of this trust," Mr. Vance continued, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a scalpel, "the principal beneficiary, Nathan Vance, and his designated heirs, which includes you, Rebecca, and your biological children, were granted a non-revocable annual annuity of $200,000, funded by the interest of that portfolio. However, that annuity was subject to an ironclad conditional covenant." Vance paused. He looked up from his papers, his eyes locking onto Rebecca with the absolute finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "The covenant states that if any beneficiary, or any legal representative acting under a durable power of attorney for a beneficiary, should ever use financial coercion, legal duress, or extortion to compel Caroline Vance to transfer, sell, or alienate any personal asset she independent built or inherited, specifically including the property located at Oakridge, 2 automatic legal triggers would occur at the exact second the transfer was formalized." Mr. Vance tapped his finger against his leather folio. On the massive screens behind us, a section of the legal text highlighted in bright, toxic yellow. "Trigger number 1, Vance announced. "The immediate, total, and permanent revocation of the $200,000 annual annuity to Nathan Vance and his heirs. The funds are redirected instantly to a charitable architectural foundation, managed solely by Caroline." Nathan let out a sharp, choking sound. His silver-tipped cane slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the hardwood stage. He reached out, his hand trembling violently as he caught Ethan's shoulder to keep from collapsing. "Rebecca!" He wheezed, his jaundiced skin turning a terrible ash-gray color. "The money. The medical fund. What did you do?" "Shut up, Nathan," Rebecca snarled, her mask of maternal elegance completely shattering. She turned on me, her fingers curling into claws. "This is a bluff. She signed it willingly. We have 400 witnesses. We have a notary." "Which brings me to trigger number 2, Mr. Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even colder. "The clawback and penalty provision. Under New York State trust law, any asset acquired through a breach of this covenant requires the perpetrator to pay triple damages back into the primary trust estate. By taking possession of the $500,000 Oakridge home under duress on this stage, an act recorded by the hotel's broadcast system and witnessed by every individual in this room, You, Rebecca Miller, acting as power of attorney for Nathan Vance, have just incurred an immediate legal debt to the trust in the amount of $1.5 million. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Corporate lawyers in the audience were already turning to their wives, whispering furiously, pointing at the screen. They knew the law. They knew an irrevocable trust with a poison pill clause was a legal fortress. Could not be contested. Could not be bargained with. It was an automated executioner. Here is the deep dark question of this entire layout. By allowing Rebecca to sign that paper, I didn't just protect my house. I cut off the financial lifeline that was paying for my father's stage 4 cancer treatments. Without that $200,000 annuity, his medical insurance would lapse within 30 days. He would spend his final weeks in a state-funded ward instead of a luxury private clinic. I look at you now, listening to my voice, and I ask, was it an act of unmitigated cruelty to strip a dying, weak man of his comfort just to ensure his tormentors were completely destroyed? Or was it simply the precise, unyielding cost of true justice? I didn't care. I stood there in my white dress, looking down at them as the net tightened. Ethan pulled the manila folder from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he dropped it onto the floor. The quitclaim deed, the paper he thought would save him from his margin calls, slid across the polished mahogany wood, stopping right at the tip of my white satin bridal shoe. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with the hollow, broken stare of a man who had just realized he didn't cower a victim. He had walked straight into a slaughterhouse. Ethan sank onto his knees right there on the polished stage, his manicured fingers dragging across the satin finish as he grabbed the fallen quitclaim deed. His face was entirely hollow, the unchecked avarice completely drained, leaving behind the gray, sweaty complexion of a man who just looked down his own execution barrel. Rebecca stared at Mr. Vance, her chest heaving violently underneath her green taffeta gown. "You engineered this," she hissed, her voice cracking over the microphone, echoing through the silent room. "You and this little bitch. You set us up." "No, Rebecca," I said, my voice dropping into that quiet, terrifyingly steady rhythm. "Your own greed built this scaffold. I just provided the sharp, unyielding rope." Two men in dark suits stepped out from behind Mr. Vance. They weren't legal clerks. They wore the distinct, heavy-soled shoes and short haircuts of law enforcement. One of them pulled a leather badge holder from his coat pocket, exposing the gold shield of the Manhattan District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit. "Rebecca Miller, Ethan Miller," the lead investigator said, his voice flat and practiced. "We have an active warrant for your arrest under New York State Penal Law Section 155.40, grand larceny in the second degree and extortion. Step down from the stage." The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the Shure microphone. It was a beautiful metallic sound. The society guests watched in absolute, paralyzed silence as Ethan was pulled to his feet, his hands secured behind his back. Rebecca didn't fight. She went rigid, her eyes locked onto me with a pure, concentrated venom that could have curdled milk. My father, Nathan, sat slumped in a chair near the podium, his breathing shallow, a single string of saliva hanging from his lip. He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with tears and heavy sedation. "Caroline, please," he whispered. "The clinic, my treatments." I looked down at him. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I felt only the profound, clinical detachment of an architect inspecting a demolished building. He had signed that durable power of attorney because he wanted to take the easy way out. He wanted Rebecca to do the dirty work so he could reap the benefits. Now he would reap the whirlwind. And here is the final chilling thought I must leave you with. As the police marched them down the center aisle of the St. Regis, past the luxury ice sculptures and the hundreds of wealthy onlookers, I knew my father wouldn't survive the year. Without the trust annuity, he would be moved to a cold, state-funded county hospice facility. Some might call me a heartless monster for using a dying man's legal authority to utterly bankrupt his entire household. But let me ask you one last time. When a toxic family system becomes entirely predatory, do you owe them your survival, or do you owe them the absolute truth? I chose the truth. And the truth under American law is completely, beautifully unforgiving. Julian stepped up onto the stage. He didn't look at the police. He looked directly at me, taking my hand in his. His grip was warm, solid, and perfectly certain. He knew the exact woman he was marrying now. He knew I was a fierce survivor who had built a fortress from the ashes of her childhood. He didn't see a victim. He saw a brilliant partner who would protect their future family with every ounce of her intellect. Eleanor Sterling stood up from the front table. She didn't look shocked anymore. She began to clap. A slow, deliberate, powerful applause. Within 5 seconds, the entire ballroom joined her, the sound deafening, vindicating, and utterly final. The greedy heirs were gone forever from my life. The house in Oakridge belonged to me. The trust was secure. True justice isn't about anger. It is about patience, strategy, and the courage to strike when the trap is perfectly set. If you believe that real, cold-blooded intelligence is the only way to beat the predators of this world, hit that subscribe button, like this story, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let the world know that some signatures cannot be forced.